Tobias Redmond sat alone on his ranch, the wind howling outside like a beast trapped in a cage. His cabin, a simple wooden structure, was his only companion. The silence inside was thick, suffocating even, broken only by the occasional creak of the walls and the distant neigh of his horses. The fire crackled softly, but it couldn't chase the cold from his soul. Every night the wind screamed at the door, begging to be let in, but Tobias kept his distance. There was no warmth here, not in this place, not in his heart. He had once known warmth. Once, he had a wife, a daughter, Sarah, with her laughter that filled the house, and little Clara, whose giggles were like music. But that was before the fire, before the violence that tore everything apart. He hadn't just lost his family that night. He had lost his faith. The world had shown him cruelty, and he had learned to shut it all out. He hadn't spoken to anyone in years. His only company was the ghosts of what was lost and the steady rhythm of his daily routine. But tonight, something was different. There was a knock at the door, a hesitant knock, not the kind that demanded attention, but one that begged. Tobias stood up, his hand instinctively going to the rifle by the door. He'd lived alone for years, avoiding the world outside. But now, the silence was broken. And with that, the memories came flooding back. Apache. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the knocking. It was the sound of their voices, faint but unmistakable. Women. They were here, knocking on his door, asking for help, his gut twisted in fear. If I open this door, my life ends, but his feet moved before his thoughts could catch up. He didn't want to help, but the look in their eyes, desperation, fear, pulled him toward the door. He thought he could live a quiet life, hiding from the past, but the past was never done with him, not yet. The wind howled through the cracks in Tobias Redmond's cabin, carrying the taste of dust and rain as it slammed against the door. The storm outside seemed determined to tear the world apart, but Tobias stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the silhouettes of 10 women standing just beyond his porch, their faces shadowed by the darkness. The rain poured down on them, soaking their clothes, their hair clinging to their faces. They were drenched, exhausted, their clothes torn from running, but still, they stood there, unmoving, waiting for him. Tobias's heart thudded painfully in his chest as he gripped the doorframe. He hadn't seen another soul in years, had sworn to never get involved with anyone again. The world outside had shown him nothing but cruelty, and yet, here they are, knocking at my door. His mind raced. Apache. They weren't just anyone. They were the very people who had stolen everything from him. His wife, his daughter, his peace. He could hear the anger rising in his chest, the memories of that night, the flames, the chaos, the loss. He had sworn never to forget what they had taken from him. And yet these women, these strangers, stood there, asking for his help. His hand drifted to the rifle hanging by the door. He had lived his life by the barrel of a gun, had fought for every inch of land and every ounce of peace he had left. These women could be here to kill me. He looked at them through the small window beside the door, his breath catching as he watched them. They were clearly desperate, and fear flickered in his chest like a flame about to go out. They weren't demanding anything, not yet, just standing there, soaked to the bone, their eyes pleading. He couldn't hear their voices over the storm, but the desperation in their posture spoke louder than any words could. "Why should I help them?" Tobias muttered to himself, his grip tightening on the rifle. "Why should I care?" They were the enemy. They were the very reason he had retreated to this place, away from people, away from the world that had betrayed him. These are the same people who took everything from me. He could feel the hatred boiling up inside him, an old familiar fire that had been smoldering for years. But there was something else in that moment, something that tugged at him from the depths of his chest. The woman in the front, her eyes. He couldn't see her face clearly through the rain, but her eyes, they weren't the eyes of an enemy, not completely. There was something raw in those eyes, something human. He could see the fear, the same fear that had once gripped him when he was alone and cold, when death had come knocking and he had nothing left to lose. What am I supposed to do? Tobias wondered, his mind spinning. He had been dead inside for so long, living with the ghosts of his past, hiding from a world that had shown him nothing but loss and pain. He had accepted it, convinced himself that this was how it had to be. His wife, his daughter, they were gone, and nothing in this world was worth fighting for anymore. But they're here, they need help, and I can't turn them away. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. If I open this door, if I help them, I'm not just helping strangers, I'm opening myself up again to something I've spent years burying. Tobias felt the weight of his decision. the burden of it pressing down on him like the storm outside, relentless, unyielding. He could turn them away, pretend he didn't hear their knock, pretend he hadn't seen them standing there, but he knew that the guilt would follow him. And if I do nothing, if I turn them away, if they die out there, I'll be no better than the people who killed my family. His hands were shaking now, and he stepped back from the door, running a hand through his hair. I've been alone for so long. I've stayed away from everyone for so long. The thought of letting them in felt like a betrayal of everything he had built, everything he had fought for. But at the same time, the idea of doing nothing felt like a death sentence. If I turned them away, I might as well be burying myself right here next to Sarah and Clara. His pulse quickened and his mind raced. He couldn't just ignore them. They weren't the same as the others, the ones who had come to his ranch all those years ago, the ones who had taken everything from him. These women were running for their lives, and Tobias knew the harsh reality of that life. The cruelty of the world. I should just turn away. I should protect myself, stay safe. It's the only way to survive. But can I live with myself if I don't help them? The voice inside his head screamed at him to lock the door, to go back to the safety of his lonely world, to keep his distance from the pain that had already ruined him once before. But if I do that, I'll never be free. I'll never be able to live with the man I've become. He looked at the women again, standing there in the rain, soaked and weary, the storm raging around them. One of them caught his gaze, her eyes pleading, and for a moment, Tobias saw more than just desperation. He saw something familiar, something that reminded him of Sarah's eyes, of Clara's smile. I've already lost everything once, he thought, but these women, they're still fighting, they still have a chance. Can I really let them die out there? The rifle felt heavier in his hands, the decision weighing on him. I can't turn away. I can't live with that kind of regret. He turned the lock on the door with a slow, deliberate movement, each click echoing through his chest like a drumbeat. He knew the consequences of what he was about to do. He knew that opening that door meant he was no longer hiding from the world. He was walking right into it, once again. With a deep breath, Tobias opened the door. "Come in," he said, his voice low, rough from years of disuse. "Get inside, now." As the women stepped into his home, wet and cold, their eyes filled with a mixture of relief and wariness. Tobias stood in the doorway, heart pounding, knowing that his world had just shifted again. He had chosen to help them, and in doing so, he had chosen to feel again. But now there was no turning back. Tobias stood at the door, his hand gripping the rifle like an anchor to keep him grounded. The storm outside raged, the wind tearing through the trees, the rain coming down in cold, stinging sheets. But it wasn't the weather that froze him in place. It was them. The women standing on his porch, drenched, their eyes wide with fear, but also determination. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but their bodies were still standing, still fighting. Tobias could see that, and it made his stomach twist with something between fear and sympathy. He didn't know these women, didn't know where they came from or what they had done, and he didn't care to. All he knew was that the last time he'd opened his door to strangers, it had cost him everything. His wife, his daughter, his peace. He had learned to shut out the world, to let the silence of his ranch swallow the pain. But now, these women stood there, asking for help, and something in their eyes made him hesitate. "What do you want?" Tobias's voice was rough, more from disuse than anything else. He didn't want to let them in, didn't want to get involved, but he couldn't turn away either. "We just want to survive the night," one of the women said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words hit him hard. Her eyes didn't beg. They were filled with the kind of quiet desperation that Tobias understood all too well, the kind of desperation that came from knowing you had nothing left to lose. Help them or turn them away. Tobias's mind screamed at him. It felt like a choice between life and death. If he helped them, it would mean inviting the very thing he'd been running from, the world, the people who had taken everything from him. But if he didn't, if he turned them away, what kind of man would he be? A coward? A man who stood by while people died just because it was easier to close the door? The wind howled louder, as if mocking him, urging him to make a choice. Tobias could feel the weight of that decision pressing down on him, suffocating him. For a moment, all he could hear was the deafening roar of the storm and the thumping of his heart in his chest. Every instinct in him screamed to turn around, to lock the door and pretend he hadn't heard them, pretend he was still the man who lived in the silence of his own making, untouched by the world outside. But their eyes, those damn eyes, something in them was familiar, something that reminded him of Sarah, of Clara, before everything had turned to ashes, before he'd been left with nothing but a memory and a rifle to keep the ghosts away. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, steadying himself. This was it. The moment where he either stayed hidden in his cage or stepped out into the world again. He couldn't live in fear forever, not when people were out there, people who needed help. With a deep breath, Tobias moved. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled the door open wider, his hand shaking as he pushed the rifle aside. "Come in," he said, his voice quieter than he meant it to be. He watched them step inside, dripping wet, their eyes flickering with a mix of hope and caution. They were like ghosts, shadows of what had been, and Tobias wondered if they too were running from something they couldn't escape. He closed the door behind them, the sound of the rain and wind cutting off as the door clicked shut. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Tobias stood still, feeling the weight of his decisions settle over him. He had done it, he had let them in. But now he had to live with the consequences. They were in his house, his sanctuary, his place of solitude, and somehow it felt like the walls were closing in on him. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting long shadows across the room, and Tobias felt a familiar ache in his chest. The fire wasn't enough to warm him. Nothing ever would be. As he watched them, the women tried to shake off the rain, their eyes never leaving the floor, as if they were afraid to look at him directly. He felt a pang of guilt. What was I expecting? That they would thank me? Apologize for needing help? No, he had made his choice, and now there was no going back. He felt the walls of his cabin pressing in on him, his old wounds reopening. The woman who had spoken before, the one with the tear-streaked face and the quiet voice, looked up at him, her eyes filled with something Tobias couldn't quite place. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't begging. She was just waiting. He felt his throat tighten. "You're safe for now," he said, though his words felt hollow. "But I can't keep you here for long. The soldiers are close. You can't stay." The woman nodded, but Tobias could see the resolve in her eyes. She wasn't scared. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing her ground. And Tobias was the one who had to decide if he was going to fight for them or leave them to the storm. He turned away from them, walking to the corner of the room where his old rifle leaned against the wall. His fingers brushed over the stock, the familiar cold steel grounding him for a moment. The rifle had been his only companion for years, but now it felt like a burden. "What's your name?" Tobias asked, his voice quieter now. The woman with the tear-streaked face stepped forward, her movements slow but sure. "Ayana," she said, her voice strong despite the exhaustion. "And these are my sisters, my daughters." Tobias turned to face her, his breath catching in his chest. He didn't know why, but hearing her say that, sisters, daughters, made him feel something deep inside, something he thought he had buried. "Why are they after you?" Tobias asked, though he was already beginning to piece it together. The fear, the desperation. It wasn't just about survival, it was about running from something worse. Ayana's eyes darkened. "We ran," she said quietly, "because we had no choice. They came and burned our village, killed our men, and took what they wanted, and when we fought back, they came for us. They want to destroy us." Tobias's chest tightened. The soldiers, the same ones who came for my family. He swallowed hard, trying to push down the flood of old pain. He had buried it for so long, had locked it away in the deepest parts of himself, but now it was rising again, and he didn't know if he could stop it. "Why me?" Tobias asked, his voice rough. "Why come here?" Ayana met his gaze, her eyes fierce now. "Because you're the only one who can help us," she said. "We have nowhere else to go." And in that moment, Tobias felt something shift inside him. It wasn't pity, it wasn't sympathy, it was a recognition. These women weren't running from their fate, they were fighting for it. And somehow, he was a part of that fight now. But as Tobias stood there, a part of him wondered if he was making a mistake. Helping them means facing my past. It means opening myself to the world again, to the pain I thought I had buried. and I can't go back. Not again. Not after what happened before. He looked at Ayanna, her eyes steady and unyielding. She had made her choice. Now Tobias had to make his, and that, he knew, was the hardest choice of all. Tobias stood by the window, watching the rain pour down in sheets, the wind howling like some wild creature trying to break in. The cabin felt too small now, too close. He could hear the women moving about the room behind him, their voices low and cautious. The fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth didn't reach him, didn't touch the chill in his bones. The place felt like a trap, his trap, and he had stepped right into it. He didn't want to help them. He never did. But they were here now, and he couldn't just close the door and pretend he hadn't seen them. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the window, the wood splintering under his fingers. He had lived alone for years, shut off from the world, burying the ghosts of his past, and now they were all back, lurking in the corners of his mind, waiting to drag him down again. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. Why did they have to come here? He had spent years building his isolation, burying his pain, keeping his distance from everyone, especially the Apache. But they're not the enemy anymore, are they? He turned away from the window, his eyes darting to the door where the women had entered. They were gathered in the corner now, their eyes dark and tired, their clothes soaked through, their faces hardened by the fear and the struggle they had lived through. But there was something else in their eyes, a kind of strength, a kind of resolve that Tobias hadn't seen in a long time. Why am I even thinking about this? He asked himself. I should lock the door, send them away before it's too late, before I end up dead, just like everyone else who's ever tried to help someone. But the moment he thought it, a voice in his mind shot it down. He couldn't just let them die out there. The cold wind howled again, and he thought about the women's faces, the way they had looked at him, eyes filled with desperation, but not just that. There was trust there too, in the way they had stepped into his home without question, in the way they had accepted his offer of safety, even knowing what it might cost him. Tobias shook his head, as if trying to shake the thoughts loose. You can't trust them, Tobias. They're the same as the others, same as the ones who killed Sarah and Clara. They'll turn on you the moment they get what they need. They'll kill you, just like everyone else. His heart thudded in his chest as the fear crept in. Every sound outside, every creak of the floorboards made him jump. He could hear their footsteps, hear the way their breath caught when they moved too quickly. They were too close now, too close to the danger that was always lurking. What if they bring the soldiers here? What if they bring death with them? But then, he remembered Ayanna's eyes, the way she had looked at him when she spoke. She wasn't begging him to help. She wasn't asking for anything, really. She had simply told him the truth. They had nowhere else to go. They didn't have a choice either. Tobias's chest tightened. He had made a decision when he opened that door, hadn't he? He had let them in. He had chosen to help them, to take them in. But now, the weight of that decision was pressing down on him, and all he could feel was the suffocating fear that was creeping up on him. God help me, he whispered, his voice shaky. He couldn't turn them away now. He had already opened the door, already let them in. If he turned them out now, they would die. But helping them meant he might die too. They're running from the soldiers, from death, and if they find us here... The sound of a distant horse's hooves echoed in the storm, and Tobias froze. His heart skipped a beat. Are they here? His mind raced. The soldiers. They could be coming for him, coming for the women. He felt the familiar panic creeping up his spine. What do I do? What do I do now? His eyes darted around the cabin, searching for some kind of answer, some way out. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He had made his choice, and now it was too late. But what about the women? What if they brought the soldiers here? What if they're just using me to escape? The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. He moved to the door, gripping the handle so tightly his knuckles turned white. The silence felt heavier now, oppressive. The storm outside had intensified, the wind whipping against the cabin walls. Tobias stood there for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the women moving behind him, their soft murmurs too quiet to understand. I've been alone for so long, he thought. Maybe this is what I need. Maybe helping them is the way I can finally redeem myself. Maybe it's the way I can stop running from my past. But just as quickly, another voice rose inside his head. What if they're not worth saving? What if they bring death here? What if I've already made a mistake and now I can't take it back? His chest tightened again, the pressure in his ribs almost unbearable. He could feel the weight of the gun in his hand, the cold steel that had kept him alive for so many years. But tonight, the gun felt heavier than ever before. It felt like a burden he wasn't sure he could carry. The knock at the door echoed in his mind, over and over. The desperation in their eyes, the fear, the trust. Tobias clenched his fists, his breath shallow as he tried to steady himself. What am I supposed to do? The question hung in the air, unanswered. He had to choose. He couldn't live in this fear anymore, couldn't let it control him. He had to make a stand, even if it cost him everything. The fear, the doubt, they had ruled his life for too long. Maybe it was time to face it, to face the world again. With a final shaky breath, Tobias turned toward the women, his heart pounding in his chest. You made your choice, Tobias. Now live with it. I won't turn you away, he said, his voice rough, but I can't protect you forever, and if the soldiers come, we'll have to fight. The women looked at him, their faces still haunted, but now there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Tobias felt it too, deep in his chest, a small, fragile spark. It was the first time in years that he didn't feel completely alone, but the fear didn't go away. It never did. The morning came cold and heavy, the storm still howling in the distance. Tobias had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of the Apache women huddled in the corner of his cabin. He couldn't shake the image of their tired faces, their eyes full of desperation and trust. The fire crackled weakly, casting long shadows across the room, but Tobias wasn't looking at the fire. His mind was elsewhere, listening for something he didn't want to hear. And then it came. The faintest sound at first, almost drowned out by the wind. A distant rumble, like thunder, but not quite. The unmistakable sound of hooves on the hard-packed earth. Tobias stiffened, his heart slamming into his ribs. He dropped the half-fixed bridle he had been working on and moved toward the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung low and heavy. His eyes darted across the empty stretch of land outside, searching for the source of the noise. And there it was. Figures, dark shapes moving on horseback, crossing the ridge to the west. At least 5 riders, maybe more. His stomach churned. They're coming. The soldiers. They had to be. Tobias's hand gripped the windowsill, his knuckles white. His instincts screamed at him to move, to do something. Where are they? How close are they? Behind him, Ayana's voice cut through the silence. It's them, isn't it? Tobias didn't turn, didn't speak for a long moment. He couldn't. His mouth was dry, his mind working furiously. They were here. They had found them. The soldiers had found them. And now, Tobias was tangled in this mess, caught between the desperate women he had taken in and the men who would kill them all for doing so. He turned slowly, his face pale. Ayana was standing in the doorway, her hands clenched into fists, her eyes sharp, knowing. They won't stop. If they find us here, we'll all die. The words hit him like a slap in the face. I know, Tobias thought. I know what they'll do. They'll burn the house down, they'll kill everyone inside, and they won't even think twice about it. He swallowed hard. How far are they? He asked, his voice hoarse. Close, Ayana said. Maybe an hour, maybe less. They're hunting us, and they won't stop until we're dead or caught. Tobias felt his heart racing. The weight of the rifle in his hands was suddenly overwhelming. It had been years since he had had to face this kind of danger. Since the night everything had changed. He had buried those instincts, those old habits, deep inside himself, but now they were resurfacing. You don't have a choice. You'll have to fight. But what would that fight cost him? What would he lose this time? His eyes flickered to the women in the corner. They were gathered together, their faces a mixture of fear and resolve. But none of them were running. None of them were giving up. They were ready to die to survive, and Tobias knew that. But was he ready to face them? Face the consequences of his decision to help them? Tobias turned away, his mind working, calculating, but his thoughts were clouded. I should run. We should run. Leave. Get them out of here. Hide in the hills. Wait until it's safe. But no, if they catch us out there, we'll die on the run. No, we can't run. We fight. We stay and fight. Ayana stepped forward, her presence steady and unwavering. Tobias, you know what will happen if they get inside. We can't hide. We can't run. We have to face them together. There's no other way. His chest tightened. Her voice was calm, too calm, as if she had already made peace with the idea of dying. But Tobias couldn't make peace with it. Not yet. Not after everything he had already lost. "I don't want to die," he said, the words coming out harsh, bitter, a confession he hadn't meant to make. He stared at the floor, his mind swirling with the past, with Sarah's face, Clara's laugh. He had chosen this life of silence, of solitude, to keep the ghosts away. But now, the ghosts had found him again, and they weren't going to let him go. "You don't have to die," Ayanna said, her voice soft but firm. "None of us have to. But if we die on our terms, not theirs. We die fighting for our lives." Tobias lifted his eyes to hers, seeing the same fire that had burned in him once before. The fire that made him run away from the world, made him fight for something worth fighting for. But now, that fire was threatening to burn him down. Fight for your life? Fight for them? The thought made his stomach twist. "I can't do this again," Tobias said, his voice breaking. "I can't lose anyone else. I've lost too much already. I can't lose more." His breath hitched, and he took a step back, away from Ayanna, away from the women. The rifle felt heavy in his hands, like a weight pulling him down. "I can't." But Ayanna wasn't backing down. She stepped toward him, her eyes locking onto his. "Then what will you do? Leave us to die out there? Will you hide in this house and let them come for us? Or will you stand and fight?" Tobias clenched his fists. "I don't know what to do. I don't know what the right choice is anymore." His mind was split, torn in two directions. Fear screamed at him to hide, to run, to protect himself, to keep what was left of his broken life safe. But something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years, was rising inside him. A strange, dangerous feeling that told him this wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger. And when Tobias finally spoke, his voice was different. It was steady, clear, as if he had made the decision. "I'll fight," he said. "We fight. But we do it together." Ayanna's face softened, but there was no pity in her eyes. There was only respect. She nodded, then turned to the other women, issuing commands, preparing them for what was to come. Tobias stood there, watching, feeling the weight of his decision settle in his chest. "We fight then." The sound of hooves grew louder, closer. The storm outside had subsided, but the tension in the cabin was suffocating. Tobias glanced at his rifle, at the weapons the women had hidden away. The time for running was over. He could hear the men's voices now, shouting orders, moving toward his cabin. The storm had died, but this was the real storm. Tobias's heart raced, the fear creeping up again. But this time, he didn't step back. He didn't look away. He was standing at the edge now, and there was no turning back. Tobias turned to Ayanna, his jaw clenched. "We won't run. We'll face them, but we'll do it our way." Ayanna met his gaze, and for the first time he saw something else in her eyes. Trust. She believed in him, and that was something Tobias hadn't felt in a long time. The hooves were almost on top of them. Tobias pulled the rifle tighter to his chest, his heart pounding, but this time he wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, Tobias wasn't running from the fight. He was stepping into it, and no matter what happened next, he was ready. The pounding of hooves grew louder, the clatter of soldiers' horses crashing through the storm-soaked earth. Tobias could hear them now, clearer than ever before. He hadn't been wrong. The soldiers were close, too close. His chest tightened as he stood by the window, staring out into the rain. The world outside had become a blur of gray, but through it Tobias could see them. Shadows, moving swiftly, riding fast, cutting through the storm. Tobias's heart thudded, each beat a reminder of the choice he had to make. Run or stand. It was that simple. Run or fight. He had run from his past for years, hidden in the safety of solitude. But now, the past was knocking at his door again. It had come for him. And this time, it wasn't just his life on the line. It was theirs, Ayanna and the women who had trusted him, who had stepped into his house, looking for safety. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that was about to hit his home. "Are you ready?" Ayanna's voice cut through the silence, calm and steady. She had already gathered the women, preparing them for what was to come. Each of them knew that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their lives, a fight for their future, and Tobias had to choose his role in it. Tobias turned from the window, his hand tight around the rifle in his grip. His palms were slick with sweat, but there was no turning back now. He had promised himself he would never hide again. He had sworn that the ghosts of his past wouldn't keep him locked in this cabin forever. And yet, as he stood there, he realized that this moment wasn't just about them. It was about him too, about standing up for something that mattered, something beyond the pain, beyond the loss. Ayanna was standing beside him now, looking him in the eye. Her face was calm, but Tobias could see the weight of the decision in her gaze. She didn't need to say anything. She knew what was at stake, and so did he. "Do you think we can win?" Tobias asked, his voice rough, strained. Ayanna's lips twitched slightly, a hint of a smile, small, but there. "If we don't fight, we'll lose, but if we fight, there's a chance." Tobias nodded, swallowing hard. There it was. The choice. Fight or die. He had been running for so long, but now he had to stand. He had to face it. There was no more hiding, no more escaping. He turned toward the others, his eyes scanning the room. Each of them, Apache women, warriors in their own right, had come here with the same purpose, to survive. They hadn't come for comfort, for shelter. They had come for life, for a chance to live without fear. Tobias looked at Ayanna again, his eyes hardening with resolve. "I won't run anymore," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll fight. I'll die fighting, but I won't run." Ayanna's expression softened, but her eyes remained sharp. She nodded once. Tobias could see the respect in her gaze, and it made something inside him stir, something that had been buried for too long. He wasn't alone anymore. The sound of approaching riders was growing louder now. The storm outside had settled, but the tension inside the cabin was suffocating. Tobias felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him like the roof was about to cave in. The gun in his hand felt heavier than ever before. If they come through that door... Tobias pushed the thought away. He couldn't afford to think like that. Not anymore. "Ready?" Ayanna asked, stepping toward the door, her voice steady despite the fear that he knew had to be there. Tobias looked around the cabin one last time. The fire in the hearth flickered weakly, the only light in the room. But that light, fragile as it was enough. It was enough to show them the way forward. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved to the window, peering through the rain, through the storm. And he saw them, soldiers, on horseback, moving fast, their faces shadowed by the darkness, their rifles gleaming in the faint light. "This is it." Tobias turned to Ayanna. "They're almost here," he said, his voice tight. She nodded, and Tobias saw her grip tighten around her knife. The others were ready too, ready to fight, ready to die if they had to. The room felt charged with energy, dangerous energy, but Tobias didn't feel the panic he thought he would. He felt something else, something that surprised him, a kind of clarity, a certainty that had been absent for years. "We fight then," Tobias said, his voice low, steady. "We fight to survive." Ayanna smiled, a thin smile, but one that spoke volumes. "We fight." They took their positions, each woman moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had been in battle before. Tobias stood by the door, his rifle ready, his body tense, every nerve alert. He could hear the soldiers now, their voices carried by the wind. They were closing in. Tobias's heart was pounding in his chest, but he didn't feel fear anymore. He felt something else, something fierce, something primal. The same fire that had driven him all those years ago, before the world had taken everything from him. That fire was burning again, and it was fueling him. The first knock came, followed by the sound of boots on the porch. Tobias's muscles coiled, but he didn't move. Not yet. The door creaked, and Tobias's hand tightened on the rifle, ready to fight. He knew the moment the door opened, there would be no going back. This wasn't just about the women in his cabin anymore. It was about his own redemption, his own fight for the life he had almost forgotten. "Are you ready?" Ayanna asked, her voice soft. Tobias met her gaze, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. He felt like he was ready to face the world again, no matter what it threw at him. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. And when the door finally opened, Tobias stepped forward, rifle in hand, ready to fight, ready to face whatever came next, ready to die if it meant they would live. The gunfire was deafening, the sound of it cutting through the air like a storm tearing across the plains. Tobias's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't feel fear anymore. There was no room for fear in that moment. His rifle kicked against his shoulder as he fired, watching soldiers drop one by one. Beside him, Ayana and the others fought with the kind of ferocity that only desperation could bring. They didn't have the training, the weapons, the numbers. What they had was something much stronger, a reason to fight. Tobias moved quickly, switching between the rifle and his pistol, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The soldiers weren't prepared for them. They thought they were dealing with helpless women and a frightened rancher. But they were wrong. Tobias's breath came in short, ragged bursts, his eyes darting between targets, but something had shifted inside him. He was no longer just trying to survive. He was fighting for something bigger than his own broken past. The last soldier fell, and silence slammed into the cabin. Tobias stood, chest heaving, his body sore from the rush of battle, but something inside him was different. The storm had passed. The fight was over. They had won. But it wasn't just the battle that had been won. Something else had shifted within Tobias. He looked around at the Apache women, their faces bruised but unbroken. They had fought, not for themselves, but for each other, for life. And for the first time in years, Tobias understood that he had fought for more than just survival. He had fought for something that mattered. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Tobias sat down, his hands trembling. The storm had changed everything. He had changed. "You've lived through a war, Tobias," he thought, looking into the flames. "You can't go back now." And for the first time in a long time, Tobias felt alive. This story of Tobias Redmont is a powerful reminder that the hardest battles we face are often within ourselves. Tobias spent years running from his past, living in isolation, too afraid to open his heart again. But when confronted with a choice, helping the Apache women or turning his back on them, he had to choose between fear and courage. In the end, he chose to fight. Not just for survival, but for a life with purpose. The lesson here is simple. Sometimes we must face our fears head-on, even if it means stepping out of our comfort zones. We all have moments where we feel broken, lost, or afraid to take risks, but it's in those moments that we truly discover what we are capable of. Life isn't just about surviving. It's about living with meaning, courage, and compassion. So, I challenge you, when you're faced with a difficult decision, choose courage. Don't let fear keep you in the shadows. Step forward and fight for what's right. You might just find that in the process you become the person you were always meant to be. If you found strength in this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join us for more stories of courage, redemption, and the power of choice. Let's face life's battles together.